so much for attending today's conversation with Secretary John F. Kelly, hosted by Colorado State University President Amy Parsons. My name is Joseph Godshaw, and I'm the Director of Public Relations for the Associated Students of Colorado State University, and I also serve as a CSU Presidential Ambassador. I'm studying political science and business administration, and today, at Colorado State University, we begin events by honoring and recognizing the original stewards of the land where our campus is now located. It is my pleasure to share our land acknowledgement statement. Colorado State University acknowledges, with respect, that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. CSU is founded as a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion, and significantly that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon. This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment. This afternoon, we have an engaging conversation to look forward to. Please help me in welcoming President Amy Parsons to the stage.
Thank you very much. I don't know. Can I just use my mic? Yep? Okay, we're good, thanks. Can you all hear me with just this? Great. Gosh, what a great crowd. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. Welcome also to everybody who's joining us online today. It's an honor for Colorado State University to be hosting U.S. Secretary John Kelly. And this is an important continuation of the dialogue that we have been having about democracy and civil discourse throughout our community in the last year. Colorado State University, as we know, was founded in the land-grant tradition in this country with the mission to strengthen our democracy through access to world-class education and research and its practical application for the betterment of our society, economy, and security. And that includes our military education at Colorado State University through our Army and Air Force ROTC programs that we're very proud of. Over the last 154 years at our great university, this mission has only strengthened and become even more critical. We believe it's CSU's responsibility to produce engaged citizens who are ready to converse with one another on the very most important and difficult issues facing our country, and to participate in all facets of civil society. Now, as most of you know, over the last year, we've been engaging in the thematic year of democracy. We've had hundreds of opportunities here to engage with different speakers of all different types, hosting events on campus, and this year we are actually redoubling our efforts in that regard as we get ready for the next election, which, as we all know, is 2 months away. Thousands of our students will be voting in this election for the first time. Tens of thousands of our students will be participating this year in democracy for the first time, voting for the first time. We are very focused on getting them registered to vote and getting them to participate this fall. Our job is to create an environment where every member of our community can become informed and express themselves and to grow in their different views, experiences, and knowledge of other people, even when, and perhaps especially when, we disagree. And our job is to become inspired by the people who are making history in our country today. And to that end, this afternoon's dialogue is a remarkable opportunity to learn from a leader with extraordinary experience and an extraordinary background of service to our country. Before Secretary Kelly joins us on stage, I'll share just a little bit about his accomplished career. Secretary Kelly is a retired 4-star United States Marine Corps general with 45 years of service to our nation. He was born and raised in Boston and enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1970. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in History and Government from the University of Massachusetts, a Master of Arts in National Security Affairs from Georgetown University, and also holds a Master of Science in National Security from the National Defense University. That checks out, that pedigree. Throughout his extensive career in the military, Secretary Kelly served in many command and staff positions, He headed the U.S. Southern Command, where he focused on U.S. border security, organized crime, terrorist organizations, and drug traffickers. He then served as the United States Secretary of Homeland Security in the Trump administration, after which he was selected to serve as the White House Chief of Staff. Since leaving the White House in 2018, he's lectured and conducted seminars on ethical and moral leadership, team building, and decision making. For that, we are grateful. Secretary Kelly is an extraordinary leader and public servant. I'm excited to hear more about his unique perspectives. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest to the stage. Come on up.
Now we shake hands.
Thank you. And now we shake hands. Have a seat. Secretary Kelly, thank you so much for coming to Colorado State University, spending some time especially with our students. I know you spent time with our student leadership today. You visited with our Army, Air Force, ROTC students, with our veteran students and our military families, and we're really grateful for your generosity of time. And especially sharing your perspective and wisdom with our students. And welcome also to our great city of Fort Collins. I just learned that this is his first time in Fort Collins, Colorado, so we're very happy to have you and host you in Colorado and at CSU. So as we get started, I'd like to just ask if you have any opening thoughts or perhaps some reflections on your day so far and the time that you have spent here at CSU.
Well, first, I'd compliment you on having a program like this to try to get the important elements of what a democracy is and what is important, so it becomes conversational and informative. I was very impressed with everyone I talked to today. They were, the ROTC students and all. I mean, it's a great tribute to the university that you still have ROTC in doing it. It's important. And then some of the other students all of the other students I talked to today were impressive.
Good job, students. We have many of them here in the
Except
front.
for him.
There's so much ground that we could cover today, Secretary. I'd like to start by talking about service and the ethos of service. One thing that I have found really interesting about you is that you have said that when you were called to be Chief of Staff, you were ready to serve President Trump, but if Hillary Clinton had been in the White House, you would have been equally ready to serve her as the Chief of Staff. That for you, it's not about politics or partisanship, it was about service. Talk to us a little bit about that perspective that you have in service, and are you worried that we don't have enough of that in the country today?
Well, I'd go all the way back to where I grew up, very working class family in Boston. Everyone, as I've said a number of times today, every man and woman in my life had been subject to the Great Depression and what came of that. All of the men were veterans. A lot of veterans from World War I were still alive. Obviously, the greatest number of World War II vets and then Korean War vets. This is in the 50s and the 60s. And even though they were working, very working class and not particularly well educated, from that service came a real sense of investment in the country. They'd lost so many friends and buddies overseas and all of that. And they came back and they were very, very committed to serving the nation. A lot of them from the neighborhood went on to be police officers. I can't say enough good things about law enforcement people. They keep us safe. Firefighters and things like that. Back then, people will ask, why did you go in the military? And back then, it was kind of easy. You had the draft. The draft helped you make that decision. I went in the Marine Corps for 2 years. Didn't expect to stay longer than that. But the men, and it was mostly men back then, overwhelmingly men. The men I met were, remarkable people. Most of them had at least one tour recently in Vietnam, some of them 2 tours. They were just great Americans. And they themselves wanted what their parents wanted when they get out of the armed forces, and that is to just have a job, have a family, have an opportunity, and be safe in their homes, that kind of thing. So when the opportunity presented itself for me to become an officer by some of my leadership, I did that, but again, never thought that I would spend more than the 4 years. But service to the nation, at least for me, and I know it's corny, but to me was everything. And interacting not only with, when I was more senior, interacting with people who were in the government more senior, but all that time serving the nation and influencing the lives of young people from all over America who came in to serve and then went home. I mean, it's just something that was extremely important to me. When I did retire after roughly 45 years, I missed it. And not, you know, I'm one of those guys, I didn't miss people opening the doors for me because I didn't let them open the doors. I didn't miss them carrying my bags because I would never let them carry my bags. I missed just the men and women in that sense of duty. So when I got a call after the November 16 election from the Trump transition team, I didn't know Donald Trump. I didn't know anyone that knew Donald Trump. I don't know where, to this day, I don't know where they got my name. But it was, would you consider taking a job in the administration? And I wouldn't say I leapt on it, but I said, yeah, let me come up and talk to you about it. They offered me DHS, which is a very, very important part of our government. They're incredible men and women who protect all of us here at home, where Department of Defense protects all of us overseas. And it was just a tremendous job. And so I got the opportunity to serve the nation in a very different capacity at DHS, and then I was drafted into the job as the chief of staff, but again, an important job, a very important job. And you know, I tried to continue that by teaching at the academies, the War Academy, the War Colleges, and in doing that kind of thing. But there's other ways to serve. I'm not saying everyone has to join the military. There's other ways to serve. You can, I mean, everything from, you know, coaching Little League and you're in the local park to working at a center for people who can't take care of themselves. A lot of ways to give back and serve our country. But service to the country is hugely important. We got, you know, it's got some warts, but you know, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
It's the greatest country in the world, and I've been to so many countries in the world, so I can honestly say it's the best.
You have advice for people like me in my position, university presidents, on how we can lead by example, instill that in today's college students as they're looking forward to what they want to do in their own careers? I
just encourage them to actually get educated. You know, particularly, I don't know how it is today, but there were requirements back when I went to college that you had to take certain courses, American history, that kind of thing. I'd encourage young people to learn as much as you can about you know, the history of our country and how we've progressed, evolved, whatever, from what we were until what we are today, and that process will never end. It should never end. And also encourage them to follow, you know, the events that go on in our country, not from some single source, but from, like in my case, and we were talking earlier, I watched 2 shows on CNN every day, and I watch 2 shows on the Fox News every day. I read the Wall Street Journal, the Times, New York Times, and the Washington Post. And you're going to get left-leaning opinions, right-leaning, and they're not extreme, but you'll get different opinions, and then you can make your own. You can make your own decision. But you have to be careful where you get your news, because as we just heard, and this has been going on for years, but as we just heard, I think yesterday with the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI, Chris Wray, our adversaries are in the nets, particularly on the social media nets, and they're influencing how an event in our country is reported by how they influence. You have to be very, very careful about what you read. And I will tell you, the good journalists that I know, they check and double check everything more than they ever have in the past, because they don't want to be writing about an issue that they learned about from the Russian misinformation campaign. So it's very, very important that they appreciate America, understand America, and God knows vote, because I mean it is the most important responsibility of a citizen, I think. And there's an awful lot of people that have worked very hard to win that right for Americans to vote. So if you don't do it, you're kind of letting us down, I think.
I agree. Students, did you hear that? There was a lot of homework for you all in there and for everybody on how to stay informed, right, on candidates and on issues. And I think that's a really important question. And today it's harder and harder, I think, for us to find good information and to be informed voters. We have we're really focused on voting drives right now at CSU. 4 years ago, we had, I think, 76% of eligible students voted. That's really high. That's higher than the national average. We're proud of that. This year we're going for 80% of our students to vote. So thank you for underscoring the importance of voting, not just in presidential elections, but in city council, right? Voting at all levels and participating in democracy. Speaking of the election, you served 45 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. In this election, 2 presidential candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, never served in the military. That's true for upwards of 90% of the population.
Sure. Yep.
What do you think is important for the 2 candidates to understand about being an effective commander-in-chief?
Well, one of the basic things about America and its relationship with the military, and this is unusual for our countries like this, but we have civilian control of the military. They're in charge. And the way that's maintained is you have the President of the United States, who's a civilian, who is the commander-in-chief. Most of the time when they first come in, they don't really know what that means yet, so they'll learn. And then the next one down in the chain of command is the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin today, and then the military. And so when the President of the United States, executing his duties, decides that there's a military option that he needs to do whatever he thinks he wants to do, the role of the military, senior military people, is to develop plans, but we first have to know what the policy is, what he wants to accomplish, and we develop plans, and it's a real iterative process, interacting with him and his staff at the White House. It's very important for the military folks to understand what's trying to be accomplished here, but by the same token, it's very important for the civilian leadership to understand what the limitations are. More often than not, in my experience in 2 administrations, both in uniform and not, you more often see the generals and the admirals arguing against the use of military force until other things are tried. And we as a country, our government has tremendous arrows in the quiver, if you will. The Justice Department has tremendous tools that they can apply, Commerce Department, people like the Energy Department. The problem, not the problem, but the difficulty there is that those kind of things, actions take a long time. Not a long time, but take time. And a lot of times these things that the president, whoever he or she is, are confronted with, right now we've got to do something. And there's only one organization in the U.S. that really can do something right now, and that's the U.S. military. But the point is, we advise the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. They take that advice, seldom take it completely, and that's because they have other things in their duties. But once the President makes a decision, the U.S. military, even though it might not, in our opinion, be the best way to do something, we salute and do it.
So 2 questions stemming from that. One, do you feel that these 2 candidates running for president today, are they both qualified for the job of president?
I would tell you that from my readings of past presidents, memoirs, things like that, past presidents, being very honest, have always been very surprised at how big the job is. Someone says, well, is so-and-so qualified to be president of the United States? The answer is no. No one is. There are certain things that make you, that would help you in terms of succeeding if you had executive experience, you've been a governor, or a big city mayor, something like that. But the job, I'm telling you, I didn't realize it myself until I worked in the White House, is so big, it's so immense, that no one is really qualified. And the next question, of course, is then what makes for a successful president? And the answer to that is the same thing that makes for a successful president of a university, an admiral, a general, a governor, and that is you surround yourself with good people who are not afraid to tell you the truth and who you'll listen to.
That's
Not
important.
do what they tell you to do, but listen to them as they help you make the best decisions. So I believe anyone could be, most people, almost anyone could be a successful president as long as, once again, they surrounded themselves with the right kind of people to help them come to the best decisions for our country.
So you today are a teacher of generals. You're a teacher of today's military leadership in this country. What are lessons that you are relaying to them as they're looking at becoming advisors to the next White House and serving in those roles?
Yeah, just they should understand. Again, the military thinks it does things differently. There's a certain, there's a culture in the military that's different than the culture, a little bit different than the culture in law enforcement. That's different than the culture of elected officials and how they look at things and difficulties. And just to understand, as I kind of pointed out before, that if you are ever really senior, like 4 stars, sometimes 3 stars, and you're over there in the sit room and you're giving the best advice, and you've got hundreds of incredibly capable officers in the Pentagon that have worked night and day, worked Christmas Day, went to work New Year's Eve, to give you the best plan imaginable to accomplish what the president is trying to accomplish. But understand, they will look at things somewhat differently, and they're under different pressures, and they will probably ask for some adjustments and whatnot. Again, as Mark Milley and Frank McKenzie said some months ago, they both generals, and they were talking about Afghanistan, and they pushed back, not pushed back, but said, okay, Mr. President, once again, we think this is our best advice. I got it, generals, but do what I tell you to do, you got it. And your military will then go and do the best job they can.
So this is a question from a student. Are you concerned about American democracy being able to withstand contested election results, if that's what's ahead of us here in a couple of months?
I'm not. I mean, this process is in place. If it's not unusual for people running for office to ask for recounts. I think every state, our federal government, has a way to do that. There's laws, that they do. So, I mean, there's been contested elections, and we have systems in place to go through the process, and at the end of it say, nope, you lost, or nope, you did win. And we try. Every state tries, and every state manages their own elections, which a lot of people say, well, you ought to federalize that. Actually, it's a good idea that the states do it, because then it would be much harder to manipulate. But you have, I don't, the 2020 election, I don't know how many lawsuits. All of them found that there was no, irregularities or things, that were illegal. But the point is, there is a system in place. And if there is a contested election, we as citizens ought to sit on our hands and wait for the end result, I think.
Yeah.
Call me crazy.
I would never call you that. In the next couple of months, in the lead up to that day, in the lead up to the election, are there things that the military and our men and women in uniform have not heard yet from these candidates that are waiting to hear from these candidates, or something that you think the candidates ought to be talking about publicly with regard to the military?
Yeah, I think the military, obviously, we're all different in one way or another. The military, with the responsibility of defending our country from any number of threats, real awful threats, threats. What we're listening for most is, will we get the tools to protect the country, whether they're fighter airplanes, cyber capability, whatever, and number of Navy ships, number of people. That's what we're listening for. And of course, the good news is the Congress is very open and, in fact, demands input from the military leadership about what they need to deter. And remember, all of our strategies in the world are not to go to war, but to deter war. And if war breaks out, then it breaks out. But all of our strategies are to deter war, diplomatically and all. But you can't deter it if you're not powerful. That the adversary is afraid to act because you've got a much bigger hammer, and you know how to use it. And that's what the military looks at. Other things, I mean, you know, I was 45 years in the Marine Corps, and literally I never had a conversation with anyone on politics. I don't think I ever remember anyone commenting, except, you know, the next day when they declare someone president, you know, someone might say, geez, can you believe he won? But that'd be about the extent of it. But it's just a very apolitical organization. Now, we all vote. I voted every election from the day I joined the Marine Corps until I left the Marine Corps, and not, you know, but I voted by mail because I was always in some other place in my home state, and I continue to vote. It is the fundamental thing that citizens should do. So we're apolitical, but we'll certainly give input to the political leadership naturally, to tell them what we think we need. And you know, what you also have is a lot of, say, members of Congress that go out and visit. I mean, when I was in Iraq, it seemed like every weekend there was another congressional delegation. But that wasn't bad, because you could tell them, this is what's going on here in my part of Iraq. And yeah, we're going to win this. But I do need some more time, or I do need some more this, that, or the other thing. And to introduce them to people in Iraq, in my part of Iraq, which was very, very violent, and let them talk to real people, whether they're the imams or the, you know, the political leadership in the province, whatever, and listen to them about how much they appreciated what we were doing and how much they needed us to stay until the terrorists were dealt with. So.
Let's talk just a little bit deeper about the point you just made about staying out of politics, because you're famous for staying out of partisan politics. You're very good at it.
I did not know that.
You're known for being able to stay out of partisan politics. Why is that so important to you personally, and so important for the military and its reputation?
Well, start with the military and it's just that we are, in fact, supposed to be apolitical. There are many, many countries on the planet where the military is very active in politics. Our founders, and I don't know if you teach civics anymore, but when I heard about all of these things when I was 14 or 15 years old, I didn't know how important those things were, those concepts were, what they wrote into who we should be. With George Washington, I mean, George Washington, everyone, you know, great president and all that. The two biggest things he did to serve our country was he went home twice.
Yeah.
He went home at the end of the war, when we, you know, the Revolutionary War, when they wanted him to stay. There was some talk about a military dictatorship. They wanted him to stay, and he said, "No, I'm going home. My job's done." And then he didn't want to be the president of the United States, but they convinced him to be the president. And then when they wanted him to stay indefinitely after his second term, he said, "No, I'm going home." We're proud of that in the U.S. military, and that's the tone that's been set inside our country, civilian control of the military. Now, yes, there's some people that occasionally run for office and become, you are now a politician if you run for office, or you go into jobs like I did at the highest level of the civilian government, and for a while you're kind of in a political world, not kind of, you are in a political world. But then when I left, I became a retired general again, and we tend not to express our opinions. I did say to people when I left the White House that I will only go public on something just to correct the record. If someone is stating something that's not how I remember it, or that's not, you know, whatever, just to correct the record. And I've done that a couple of 3 times.
Let's talk about one of those times, because I think many of us saw you on the national news a couple of weeks ago when you publicly corrected former President Trump. You entered into the conversation when he said that the Presidential Medal of Freedom is better than the Congressional Medal of Honor given to military members who have displayed extraordinary bravery. Talk to us about why you felt that was a moment for you to enter into the public dialogue.
Well, simply, I mean, just because he was, the way he was characterizing the 2 medals, and the Presidential Medal is a very important medal, but the Medal of Honor is something so different. You know, you don't win the Medal of Honor, you earn the Medal of Honor. And you earn it because you did something that was irrationally brave. That the assumption would be when he or she did it, that you would be killed. That's kind of the level. And so when someone says that one medal is more important than the other, I just corrected the record. I mean, there were others that did it as well. Some Medal of Honor winners, earners. Certainly the VFW chief did. But that's I believe the president had it wrong, and we just needed to correct that because as the American public understands what the Medal of Honor is from a distance, but I think for them to then hear that actually this other one, which is important, you do whatever to get the presidential medal, but it's not even close to the congressional medal or the Medal of Honor.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us appreciated you correcting the record on that, and are there other things like that, I guess I would ask, that you want American society in general, as we said, 90% of Americans don't serve in the military, might not even know someone who's serving in the military, that you want them to understand about the military and the role in society today. And even for our own students, we have a rich history of military education in our Army and Air Force ROTC, but it's a small minority portion of our university. What do we want our students to know about that history and for American society to know about that military history in the U.S.?
I think I'm very confident that most Americans already know, not in the detail, but they're so appreciative of what the military has done to protect them, their families, their kids, their grandkids. Forever, certainly since the mid-'70s, after the Vietnam War, when the military was not considered to be particularly effective or admirable because of the Vietnam War and how that was portrayed by certain people in Washington. But the military senior leadership worked very hard in the 70s to raise the opinion of the American public relative to its military. And since then, the military has been the most admired and respected institution in the United States. Second to that, consistently, is law enforcement. Pretty impressive, and it used to be very high. It's still number one, but in the last several years, there's I think a lot of misinformation, misreporting on the military going woke and all of this stuff. So we've slipped from, say, 80 percentile to, say, high 60s. Same thing with the police, law enforcement. They've slipped, but they're still number 1 and 2. And I oftentimes say that. I remember I was in my headquarters in Miami, and I made that case in a hearing. I mean, not a hearing, but a conference on human rights I was conducting. We did a press avail afterwards, and one of the young reporters said, American loves its military, and oftentimes not exactly understanding why I love the military, just they protect me, and that's a good thing. But she said, is it really good for in a democracy to have the most admired, respected institution being the military? Is that good in a democracy? And I said, in our democracy, for sure, it's good. I said, what's really bad, I think, in our democracy is the opinion most Americans have of our elected officials. And you should understand, and I know a lot of them, there's good people in Congress. Regardless of your Republican, Democrat, there's good people in Congress. There's good people on the congressional staffs. We tend to hear mostly from the ones that are more vocal on issues. But as I say, as in a democracy like ours, the elected officials, they pay a high price for being elected, many of them. They should do the best they can to change the opinion of the American public. But right now we're in a position in the country where it's nothing but loggerheads. We get the presidential election two months. But I just hope that whatever happens in November is going to happen. We're not going to change anything between now and then. But I would like to think that we all, as citizens of our country, at whoever's elected, we step back, take a breath, and say, let's start talking to each other. Let's start, disagreement, sure, that's what democracy's about. But let's step back, take a breath, and say, okay, how do we get out of this malaise that we're in? But we have a great country, and we're going to be all right.
It's great to hear some silver linings in what you just said, some hope that you have in the system, because I think it's easy to get discouraged looking at it. Talk a little bit more about that hope, what you want for the country going forward, and what gives you hope that we can achieve it.
Well, you know, like any society, like any country in the current years, we have difficulties, problems. We should be solving those problems. That's why we have a government. You know, back in the olden days, what most people wanted out of the federal government was, you know, the bridges repaired, highways maintained, obviously protect the country, so the military. Not so sure that's being done as effectively anymore, and I think that's the role of a government, is to, you know, to serve obviously the people, and you know, if we have an economic problem in the country, which we do, solve it. Somehow, work with the other side. You're never going to get 100%. So get 70% now, and you know, win the next election and maybe get more. But we have economic issues. We have health issues, real bad health issues. We have a drug problem that's awful, killing hundreds of thousands a year. And all of these things actually are fixable if, you know, we can just get our officials together to talk to each other and come up with some realistic plans to solve the problems.
Yeah, I think what gives me hope, and a lot in the room, because we are a big public university, is seeing the energy and enthusiasm of our students.
Yep.
You know, we're just a few weeks into our semester here at CSU. We just welcomed a big new freshman class. These students are full of energy. I think in part maybe because they were disrupted by COVID when they were in high school. Coming into college, they're ready to participate. They're ready to work on global issues. I worry that when they see the extreme polarization in politics, that they'll be turned off from going into a career of service, going into the military, running for office. What advice do you have for those students? So we need those students to jump into the fray, not run away because they don't like the partisanship.
Well, again, back to what we talked about a little while ago. I think at this point you should assume, not because you're young, I think all Americans should assume that what they're getting from the news media could be unreliable. And as I say, I would argue to read other publications. If you're a fairly conservative person, then listen to the people who are more liberal on TV, or read their more liberal publications to get their perspective. But not to by no means give up hope. That's not an issue. We'll be all right.
We'll be all right.
Yep.
How have you, over the course of your career, honed that skill of being true to your values and your convictions while still keeping an open ear to other perspectives and still being open to maybe changing your mind? In politics, that's often seen as a negative. It's flip-flopping, right? It's always couched in a negative. We encourage here people to change their minds, to listen to other voices. How have you managed that, or do you have any examples to share about how people can change their minds?
Well, first I'd say it's kind of counterintuitive to most people that have not served in the military. Not everyone has to serve. I mean, it doesn't make you, just makes you a little bit different, but not. It's not for everybody. But it's counterintuitive to most Americans. But in the military, we want people to disagree. As a commander, we want people to disagree if they honestly believe that what we're talking about is the wrong thing to do. And that could be very junior people in the room, but you have to set an environment, an atmosphere, so what they don't mind saying. And you know, things that I would want to do, say when I was in Southcom, Southern Command, it was very, very law enforcement focused. I don't have law enforcement authorities, so I would say, okay, I want to do this in Honduras, and my lawyers would say, sir, you don't have the authority to do that. Okay, how much of what I just said I want to do I have the authority to do? And they tell me, okay, up to this point, sir, okay, then now we have to go to FBI, DHS, people like that, and tell them this is what we're going to do. But if that guy had not, if those lawyers had not disagreed with me, and they were 5, 6, 7 ranks lower than me, I would have gone off and done the wrong thing, and it wouldn't have been very good for the United States or for me legally. So you should encourage people to disagree with you. Part of that is also to encourage people to express their opinions. I've found myself to be wrong a lot of the time, and and to listen to people and they make their case where it's a political issue or something in the military, and change your mind. It's not, you know, I know it's, you know, again, if you change your mind in the political world, it's flip-flopping, and much of it is flip-flopping. But if you honestly, you know, have a conversation with people and they convince you that whatever it was you believed before, you don't believe anymore, that's a good thing.
Do you have any strategies you can share with us in that regard? Any top secret strategies you can share with us? If you know you're facing somebody with a very different political ideology and coming to the table, you just can't agree on anything. How do you start to find that common ground? Because there's always some common ground. There's always some.
Well,
common
the first thing
ground
is you don't
in
have to hate each other and call each other names. I find it really people that where I live in Virginia, luckily not my family, but that don't, you know, they don't, because of the differences in the arguments that they have over politics, they don't do Christmas and New Year's or Christmas and Thanksgiving anymore. Yeah. Because the siblings won't come to mom and dad's house because they, whatever. That's crazy. I can remember growing up where I grew up in Boston, solidly Democratic, different Democratic Party at the time, but solidly Democratic. But we had a couple of those Republicans in the family, and they would, we'd get together for Christmas, and they would argue and this kind of thing, but never dislike each other or hate each other or raise their voices at each other. Never. And that's kind of one of the things we have to move beyond. And at the end of the day, at the end of the discussion, you say, okay, enough of that. I'm not gonna convince you. Okay, let's go have a beer or play golf or something. But the example should come from the top, from the elected officials, whether it's state or federal. But right now, there are not a lot of that going on.
Yeah, are there people out there that you see on the landscape that you think model this really well, that we should emulate, and how they're able to bridge those divides and bring people together?
Well, here again, I don't have the names, but I'm told, like in the House of Representatives, there are groups, both sides of the aisle, that are working together.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about them much because they're not what's on TV, because they don't get the clicks, But there are people up there that are doing the best they can. I know there's veterans groups, there's various caucuses, and but because the majority is so close that 2 or 3 members of Congress or members of the House can control things.
Yeah.
But it would be great to see them set the tone and set the example. But you can still tell the students, argue with each other, have at it, but play soccer tomorrow together.
Then go out and have a beer if you're of legal drinking age afterwards. That is the advice I think you're
you
hearing.
You had to say that, I guess, huh?
Yes, if you are 21 or over, yes. Speaking of going on television, I have to say, I think it's remarkable that you have not written a book, given all of your experience. Typically, when we have these speakers here, everybody's written a book, and we're talking about the book and book signing. You haven't written a book. You must get requests every day to write a book. You're not on the speaking circuit on television at night. You must get asked about that all the time. Talk to us a little bit about that and saying no to those opportunities.
Well, it's just when I left the White House, which was a political job, I became a retired general again, and with the only caveat would be to correct the record. Excuse me, that someone in the White House to correct the record on something, to just remain as apolitical as possible. The American public doesn't want people that are in the military to be politicized. You just don't want that. Again, very high numbers in the military vote in elections, but they don't talk about it, and they accept every election, and they do. This has happened in the past where presidents have wanted the military to do things that of a political nature, and luckily the lawyers have said to the commanders, "Hey, sir, this is not, unless he declares or unless he does this, that, thing, you really can't do this. It's not within the law." And the commanders say it's not within the law, can't do it. The tough ones are if you're asked to do something that you think is a really bad idea, but it's still legal. It's still within the authority of whoever. But here again, you go back to the president and say, "Sir, I got it. I know why you want to do it, But let me tell you what I think the second, third, fourth order effects are going to be. And you have a conversation about it, and if you don't change his mind, then you go execute the legal order.
How many times will you try to change his mind? I'm just curious what that
Until you
interaction with
actually
the
do it.
president looks like when you do
Yeah.
disagree. How does that actually play out in the situation? room?
Disagree is probably, as a general, I don't think you disagree with the president. You just try to help him understand the second, third, fourth order effects of what he's ordering. And a lot of times, frankly, we're in the military, you plan and then plan some more. A lot of these things that pop up are pop-ups, and the people in charge are trying to solve this problem right now. But if you do that, there's second, third, fourth order effects, and you're duty bound to tell the president, he is the president, what the possibilities are about if he does this but not that. And one of the things, again, in the military, in the Pentagon, and down in the combatant commands, there are so many plans that exist just in case. I remember once when Secretary Panetta, who was Secretary of Defense, wonderful guy, when he first came into the job, every morning on CNN or Fox News, whatever, there'd be some breaking news thing in the Middle East or somewhere. And as he was getting more and more into the job, I started having the Joint Chiefs of Staff send someone up, subject matter expert, to talk about that event and whatever it was, wherever in the world it was, just so he knew how we saw it and whatnot. And so, but invariably it would be, and yes, sir, we have a plan for that, just in case it happens and all of that. So after a week or so of this secretary is a great guy. He said, "Kelly, do we have a plan for everything?" And I said, "Sir, we have a plan if South Carolina invades North Dakota. we have a plan for that." But my point in saying that is we have, lieutenant colonels, majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels. All they do is plan. So they're given a particular thing, like the Red Sea operations, and they plan and dissect it and open it up and war game it. And so if the president says, "I want to do this to protect shipping in the Red Sea," they got a plan. And then he gives the specifics of what I want to do and the limitations perhaps, and then they just adjust the plan and go with it. But again, the second and third order effects sometimes are lost on people who are only looking at the thing that's right in front of their face.
Yeah. Can you tell us what does happen if one state invades another? Just curious what that plan might look like.
I think you call out the National Guard.
Okay. What are some of the other just surprising things to you about being the White House Chief of Staff that maybe you just could not have anticipated as you took on that job?
Well, again, as a person that I was before, I didn't have a sense for the decision-making process, and there's so many more filters. And this is not a criticism at all. There's, the military looks through the filter of protect the nation. That's pretty simple. And when we're asked to, or told to, develop military plans to do that, we do it. Mm-hmm. Our political system, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, our political systems have other tensions and other things that need to be addressed. Sure. That a military guy doesn't look at. Mm-hmm. But the civilian leadership needs to look at because of a lot of different reasons. So what surprised me again was how so many more filters that they look through on a given issue. But I would tell you, when whether it was the Obama, all the administrations I've been involved in, it's only been a couple of three, but they do listen. And at the end of it, in the movies they have the president, get out of here, you're all stupid. They do listen, and they do trust. But again, if one of those filters is that you can't quite do that or can't quite do that, General, then okay, boss.
Yeah.
The other thing it struck me is when they develop a plan, they actually think, if it's a 10-step plan, it'll actually be accomplished. In most plans, whether they're military plans or political plans, you start them, but they'll change just because factors change and all of that. And you need to be, and sometimes they're not, my observation, need to be flexible in change. So you decide to try to solve a problem. You're never going to get a 100% solution, so you develop a 80% solution, and then once you start, depending on how effective that plan is and all of that, you adjust off the plan, as opposed to just try to execute the plan that's not working. So, but we all help each other in doing better at these kind of things.
Well, I think we'll all sleep better at night knowing that there's advisors like you and that listening is happening in the White House, and communication between the Pentagon and the White House, and there's all those contingency plans for things that come up, and any other sort of just areas of hope. As we're winding down, I'm going to switch back to talking about our students, but before we do that, just things that you want our community to know to give them hope that things are working and that we're going to be okay as we move through this dicey next election cycle.
Well, we have a system of government that some really smart people sat down and hashed out a different time, and they had to make some decisions. I mean, there were some decisions that they made that if they didn't make those decisions, we would not have the United States of America. So they had to put, and those things have changed over. So our system of government is flexible and changes, and when it has to. But again, particularly now, we're so close to an election, and there's so much rock throwing and insults and all the rest of it. It's hard to put much of this in perspective. And as I say, as a fellow citizen of our country, I just hope when this is all over, we can step back, take a breath, and then say, okay, it's working, but it ain't working real well. How do we change this?
Right.
And start talking to each other.
Hopefully motivate these guys to do that, right?
Yep.
And to take on that leadership role in the future. I know I keep pointing at you guys just because you're right in my line of sight. I'm really talking about all CSU students, not like you, Nick, in the front row. But, students are our number one priority at our institution. Student success is always our number one priority here. What can these students be doing today to participate in democracy now, 10 years from now, 20, 30 years from now, until they are the ones up here having these conversations about our country?
I'd like to think, first and foremost, they vote, if they're eligible, naturally, that they vote, and then as time goes on, they consider going into public service. I talked to quite a group today, I think there was a group here, about public service, whether it's at the federal level, city level, whatever, because we need good public servants. It's what makes the government. And then as time goes on, even consider running for office. It's funny, I got a few phone calls about a year ago, people that I didn't know who they were, but they'd call me and introduce and say, sir, I was talking to a friend of yours, gave me the number, and I just got out of the Marine Corps, the Navy, or whatever, and I'm thinking of running for public office. And I would immediately say, do it. But sir, you don't even know, do it. We need men and women of character, not they're not only in the military, but a lot of them, the men and women of character. We need men and women of character that are willing to step forward and serve the country in the political role. And they'd even say, well, sir, I'm kind of a Dem, and they wouldn't even say the word. I said, well, I don't care what party you are. We need people like you. So I would hope that they join all of you, students, you consider public service, and then consider running for office. But other things you can do, and a lot of people do it, is in their communities, as I say, coach, Little League, or work with, homeless shelters and things like that. You can be a very successful lawyer and then spend a couple of nights a week working with people that need help, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Don't walk away. Don't turn your back on the duties of a citizen, and certainly don't turn your back on what is this great thing called America.
That's great advice, and we talk a lot about being at Colorado State University strengthening our muscles in democracy, so we're ready when the students graduate that they can go out there and really do their duty as citizens and participate all facets of society. So It's great advice. I know our students listening online and everybody here is listening when you say that. As we wrap up, any final words or things that you want to say before we...
No, just thanks for the invitation. I'd say mostly to the younger people, the level of satisfaction you get out of serving the community, the state, the nation, you can't imagine it until you do it. And it doesn't have to be 45 years in the Marine Corps. I mean, you could do, 4 years in the Army or something. No, it doesn't have to be military service. It doesn't have to be, but there's a lot of needs out there and for Americans to get involved in. Something I love this, I'll tell you the story about the volunteer firefighters. I think I told you earlier, but I was DHS, and I went to speak to 700 chiefs of fire chiefs from around the country. And I didn't realize it, but the vast majority of firefighters in the country are volunteers. So they get the training on their own time, and then they sign up to stand duty 1, 2, 3, 24-hour periods a week, a day, a month rather. And they just stand there waiting to run somewhere and risk their lives to save someone they don't even know. It's incredible. So I'm talking to them anyways, and in the course of, and volunteerism to me is takes my breath away really, but I said to them, just out of curiosity, how many of you are veterans? And like the vast majority raised their hand. So they're volunteer firefighters when they don't have to be. They joined the military when they didn't have to. And I said, well, how many of you are, kind of teach, student help as a volunteer teacher? A lot of them. How many of you, kind of are involved in Girl Scout sport? Most of them. A lot of them. So that sense of volunteerism to the community, to the country, we need to somehow, I don't know if we bottle it, we take blood from them, and I don't know how you do it, but that level of community activism and by extension patriotism to the country was just, to me, it was just breathtaking. It really was.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end on that. That's a really inspiring story, and I know that I speak on behalf of all of our students and our community at Colorado State University when I say thank you for coming to CSU and being willing to share your perspective and your time. I know you don't do this a lot. You don't go on the news shows, and the fact that you're willing to come and sit down and spend a full day with us and all this time with our students and our military families, it's very inspiring. It's meant a lot to our community to have you here, and we're all grateful for your service. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.